So, hi Becky, how are you doing today?
I'm really well, thank you, Tutu. Thank you for inviting me to talk.
You're welcome. Thanks for taking the time. I think before we start, I wanted to first and foremost thank you for your time. You've actually made time to come today to come and discuss this very important topic, and I really appreciate you taking the time. So, for those that are not already aware, I think most people on this call would be. This topic that we're discussing is navigating gender identity in the workplace and practical steps for inclusion. So, our focus really is to firstly understand um, what gender identity is, and how can employers, support um, support employees in that sense. That's what we want to. So we want to talk about practical steps. What's really important to know. And here with me is the lovely Becky Taylor, who is going to be helping us explore this topic. So a little bit about Becky. She joined the RAF when she was 16 years old, and she doesn't look a day over 20 now.
Very kind.
And her career spans 5 decades, since the 1980s. Becky is also an independent HR consultant and an impartial mediator. She's really passionate about people and offering a safe space and the freedom to ask questions without prejudice and judgment. Becky is the mother of a transgender child, and she has lived experience of issues facing transgender people and the individual journey to their true authentic self. So welcome, Becky. So where should we start? Should we start with, I've said a little bit about you, how you've come to be here. Should we start a little bit by talking about gender identity and sexual orientation?
Yeah,
Because
sure. I mean, they are terms that people get very confused with
yes,
because people use the term gender when they mean sex, or they use the word sex when they mean gender. So that's really one of the first things where the confusion and the education and the awareness really needs clarification, because they are two very, very different things. And I like to see them as three elements of science. So you've got biology, which is your sex. So the biological part of a human being is the sex, and that is normally identified by the reproductive organs that you're born with. Um, so that is your sex, and then you have what we call the chemistry element of the science, and that's your sexual orientation. That's attraction. So it doesn't matter which bits and pieces you're born with or you're made up with, that is who you're attracted to. And then you have the social side of it, so the psychology of the
okay,
three sciences, and that's gender. So that's where your gender comes into it, because it's when you have a fundamental difference between what your brain thinks and what your body displays. So you've got your biology, your natural biological makeup, you've got your
that's how you
chemistry.
were born.
Yeah, that's how you're born. And
Okay,
your chemistry, which is the attraction, so that's more your sexual orientation. And then you have the psychology, which is how you think and how you feel and who you generally believe you are. And when that psychology is at odds with the biology, then that's when we have people who are exploring their own gender identity, and they're going on their own personal journey of discovering their authentic self. And sometimes that may start and end with the chemistry, with the sexual orientation, but sometimes it develops into people becoming non-binary, and then at the other end of the scale for people becoming transgender, which is what happened to my son. um, so he was born a little girl, and biologically female. And by the time he was 10 or 11, he was absolutely at odds with his biological makeup. Um, and so as a parent, this was um, just something that you can't even prepare yourself for, because
yeah,
I knew so little about it. despite having been in the LGBTQ progressive movement and understanding a lot about minorities and inclusivity and diversity, this really wasn't an area that I knew much about. So we've all as a family had to really navigate that. So I feel quite qualified now through my own experiences and through those of my son to be able to talk, particularly from a workplace inclusion environment, understanding the challenges that he's faced on how we can be more exclusive. So I think understanding those three different scientific terms of the biology, the chemistry, and the psychology, that's almost like lesson one in how to expand your awareness and your understanding.
So I know that this is this can be a very sensitive topic to discuss in general, and then particularly within the workplace perspective. I would just like to know what is it that are the common challenges that we will say, can we say gender diverse employees face within the workplace? So your I would imagine that now is a little bit different to what it was probably, I don't know, 10, 15
Yeah,
years
it
ago.
is. It's a
But
lot
even
different.
now, some of the challenges obviously still continue depending
Yeah.
on where you work and all of that. So can you give a quick overview of some of these challenges?
Yeah,
Um,
sure. I mean, there are practical challenges, and the number one for that is going to be toilets. Because we inherently live in a binary world of, going back to that biology of male and female, and we have catered for that for decades and centuries. We've catered for a binary world. So now that we are having to think a bit more about a non-binary world and a world with different gender identities, we can't pigeonhole facilities, but nor should any companies feel that all of a sudden they've got to completely remodel their workspace to be more inclusive. There are other things that we can do, but that's a practical challenge, and I think most restaurants, most hotels, most public spaces will have a binary set of facilities,
yeah.
so to speak. So that's a practical challenge that needs to be overcome. And there are very simple things that we can do for this, about this, and that's just make sure that any facilities that we have are just a safe space. So you can take all of the male and female labels off the door, and you can just have lockable, independent facilities that people can go in and use. And if that's not practical in your current workplace, you could have, like little flip signs on the door saying occupied, unoccupied, and when it's occupied, you as long as it's lockable, you don't go in there. We don't have to put labels on things to say that only this group of people is allowed to use this facility and only this group of people is allowed to use this facility. Make the facilities available for everybody. I mean, I
What
think
about, sorry to interrupt you, what
that's
about
okay.
in cases where, so practically for small businesses, for example, they will be quite limited in
Yeah,
terms of what this structure is like, what the toilets look
sure.
like, for example. What happens in that case? But then also, if you have like cubicles, for example,
Yeah.
where you go into one room and then there is, I don't know, three, four, five odds, are you suggesting that each one of those are labeled as how does that, how does it work out in such scenarios?
Yeah. So I think you've got to you, you've got to try and put yourself in the space of where is the risk and where is the fear. Okay, so if it is just a one single cubicle that's got the toilet, the sink, and the hand dryer and everything in one space, like you get in most coffee shops now, and quite a lot of smaller coffee shops will just have one space, and anyone can use it, disabled, mums and babies, females, males, and it's available for everybody to use. So that's one example of a really small space, and as long as there's a lock on that door and that space is private, then that's fine. It does get a bit trickier, as you've just described, when you have a traditional male and female facility and you go into a room that has lockable cubicles inside. But that lockable cubicle is that safe space. When you come out of that cubicle and you go to a sink to wash your hands, Is that any different to walking into the communal kitchen and washing your hands in that sink next to a male or a female colleague or anyone else in your workspace? It is just somewhere where you're going to wash your hands. And I do understand that this is a real culture and mindset that people need to really
Absolutely.
think about, because
Yes.
we're embedded in a traditional mindset of that has to be a private space for this particular group of people. But this kitchen is fine. Everyone can use the sinks there. And, in your homes, you don't have male and female facilities. Some homes only have one bathroom, one toilet, and everybody shares it. I know honestly that it is your family, but you will have people coming to visit the house, maybe work people. You can be in all sorts of different environments. But I think when you've got a forward-thinking, progressive, inclusive culture in your workspace, that toilet issue shouldn't be a difficult conversation to have. As long as there is a private space for everybody to feel secure, then you work with the facilities that you have.
Okay, thank you. Thanks for sharing that. Let's move on from toilets for a minute. Let's look at things like having inclusive policies, um, relationships among co-workers, because these are some of the things that people worry about, whether
Yeah,
they share it with us as HR people or not. It doesn't change the fact that it is what it is at the end of the day.
sure.
When it comes to how so let's start from the issue of pronouns, for example. Some employees would not want to use pronouns, so they say, well, I support you, you know, we work together, you're a great person, don't have a problem with all of that, but I don't want to use a pronoun. I understand what using a pronoun signifies personally, this is for me, but in cases where employees, colleagues are not prepared to use pronouns, for example, to identify themselves, to show support to maybe the trans community and that, what do we do? Because as HR professionals, the people look to us because they believe that we have the answers to everything. Sometimes we
Sure.
do, sometimes we don't.
Yeah. No, I
That's the
understand.
that's the
I,
reality.
I,
How
I
how do we navigate such a situation?
Right, so I see pronouns as a very individual choice. And you can choose to use pronouns and you can choose not to use pronouns. And if you as an individual choose not to use a pronoun, that's fine, that's your choice. But stand fast, you can't really get upset if people get your pronouns wrong because you haven't told them that you use pronouns.
Right,
So for my son, for instance, he still looks he still has a feminine look to him because he's had no trans reassignment surgery yet. So he still looks very female orientated. But he tells people that his pronouns are he and him. Now, if somebody misgenders his pronouns, he doesn't get upset about that. He will just correct them politely and say, oh, just so you know, my pronouns are he, him.
right.
Um, what's wrong with that? There is absolutely nothing wrong with that. For somebody who has misgendered the individual, 99.9% of the time, it's going to be a mistake. They're not going to have done it on purpose to upset somebody or cause offense. And so it's that normal grown-up conversation that you have with somebody about your pronouns. And if a colleague is purposefully not using an individual's pronouns when they've already identified to them what their pronouns are. So if Ozzy has told somebody that his pronouns are he, him, and somebody continues to refer to them as she, then that is transphobic behavior. So, and it's as simple as that. So from a HR perspective, it is that's a misconduct because you are purposefully referring to somebody in a manner that they have politely asked you that they do not
Not
wish
to
to be
do
referred
so.
to. Yeah,
There is also the issue of what's happening, the culture wars, that's happening out. I mean, I say out there, but the workplace is a reflection of society at the end of the day. There's an ongoing culture war where people have many different views which they share quite openly on social media, and these are people that are employed. in one way or another, or doing business, in one way or another. How does that translate into the workplace? How are employers supposed to manage that? Say, for example, somebody um, who has really strong views about gender reassignment, for example, and they've shared that quite openly on I say Twitter, but it could be any platform. But I kind of have a feeling that Twitter is where most of these problems
Yeah.
exist, in comparison to the other social media platform. How do employers navigate this? Because a lot of employers are not really sure, where do we stand in this case when it comes to management of risks
So I would always
to
recommend that
employers.
employers have a social media policy
Mhm.
as part of their HR handbook and their HR pack up. And it's everybody's own personal responsibility to be responsible for their own actions. Now, that doesn't mean to say that we're not allowed our own thoughts, we're not allowed our own opinions, that we can't express ourselves and our own values and ethos. But when those thoughts and opinions cross that very blurred line into areas of transphobia or homophobia or racism or any of the other protected characteristics, then we have a responsibility to take
Mhm.
action about that, because not only is the individual um, reflecting themselves, they are also a reflection of your company. And so it will come back on the company quite hard if they're not seen to be doing anything about it. So yes, you can have an opinion to say, well, I don't really understand that and I don't get it. I wish I want to learn more. But if you're expressing an opinion that's going to cause offense and is hurtful, then the social media policy should have that swept up quite nicely. So it's quite common for companies to have social media policies now and enforce them.
Okay, so we are looking at policy, having the right policies in place to ensure that, companies are inclusive and they state what's acceptable behavior and not acceptable behavior, and fostering that culture of respect. But where do you think that, um, for allies, or should I say colleagues or leaders looking to support, gender diverse co-workers, what do you think that they should do? What advice would you give to them?
Well, I think we all know that the culture and the mindset of an organization is set from the top, and
Mm.
that's by the leadership. So you absolutely have to have a supportive, inclusive culture right from the very top of your company, right down to the very
So
bottom.
leadership sets the tone.
100% leadership sets the tone. Because it's if people can see you behaving in an inclusive and a diverse way with zero tolerance, then they are naturally going to follow. You can't have a policy, a zero tolerance policy, and not uphold it yourself.
Mm.
Um, so
That's true.
tone has to be set from the top and filter down to everybody, and we need to be quite clear in our HR policies of what will and will not be tolerated. And again, it doesn't mean to say that people can't have their own opinion, but it's how people express that opinion that's important.
Where is the
um
line though? Where is the line? Because when people say, yeah, I'm saying this, but this is my freedom of speech. You can't
yeah,
take that away from me. And then we're also on the other side, we're saying we have a zero tolerance policy
yeah,
where we're not going to allow any behavior that we consider to be disrespectful or inappropriate.
yeah,
Where is the line? Sometimes would you say that it can be quite difficult, depending on how strong the characters on both
yeah,
sides are as well?
yeah. No, it's absolutely 100%. And also, things like this are very subjective, so the line will be different for you as it is for me. But if I said something to you that you found offensive,
Yeah.
and I explained to you that I didn't mean it in an offensive manner, and explained why I had asked you that question, or um, had my thought and opinion on something in a way of trying to educate myself and encourage my own awareness. I mean, who then makes the decision on whether what was said was offensive? Because you were offended by something I said doesn't mean that I meant offense by saying it. So who's who has the responsibility in that subjective environment to make the decision on whether or not that was offensive or not? Because we could all go around and say, oh, well, I'm offended by that, I'm offended by that, and then nobody would ever speak to each other. And
Okay.
I suppose the responsibility is on each of us to explain why I've been offended by something, or why what I said I didn't feel was offensive or meant any offense.
Does that not put a bit of a burden on the employees, on transgender or non-binary employees? Does that not put a burden on them to have to see? It almost seems like they have to educate us.
But they kind of do
Does
sometimes.
does that not
Yeah,
then put a burden on them where now it's down to them to tell us, what's
yeah.
acceptable and what's not acceptable, and should that be the case at all?
Well,
I think we already know the answer to that.
it is. It's a really interesting point, though, Tutu, because the journey for a transgender individual will be different for everybody, and some
Yes.
people will be incredibly private about it and won't want to talk about it, but others, like my son, are like, ask me anything, this is your safe space, this is your opportunity, I can help you learn. But just because one person is that open about how they are and the journey that they're on doesn't mean that somebody else is. And I don't think it's also right to just completely pigeonhole this to gender identity and transgender and the LGBT community in the workplace. It can be anybody. It can be anybody who is a little bit different, neurodiverse. They might be an older employee, they might be incredibly young and naive an employee, but anybody who is in that workplace who may feel a little bit excluded or a little bit different, or there's something about them that is different, that may potentially require a reasonable workplace adjustment, right? Doesn't mean to say that we shouldn't have those conversations, because it's having those conversations that will make everybody feel better about the workplace and the environment and the inclusive culture that we're trying to create. Because at the end of the day, people are people. You cut us all, we all bleed. It doesn't matter what the packaging is.
Mm.
It matters what's inside. Are you kind? Are you decent? Are you honest? Are you loyal? Are you a lovely person? Are you respectful? Are you mindful? And there will be varying degrees of these character traits in all of us. Um, but we all have a responsibility to work in to foster an environment of working where people feel comfortable and safe to go into work. And if that's not happening, we have to look at the root cause of why that's not happening. And is it a culture? So do we just need more training and awareness? Is it the individual? Do they need more training? Do we need more resource? Do we need more facilities? What is it that we need to do to make sure that every individual, no matter what package they arrive in, can feel safe and comfortable working alongside every other colleague?
That's really helpful. Thank you. But I think it also goes back to what we said earlier about the leadership setting the tone. I think there still needs to be, I think there is a danger that we think because these matters are spoken about more openly now, and it's more mainstream, almost, even if I can say that, there's no need for education because everybody should know. So I think there is a danger there, that there is an assumption that we should all know, we should all be aware, we should all understand because of the world that we live in now. Everything is online, is spoken about on social media, is on the news. But I think that there still needs to be a certain level of education,
Yeah.
especially at the leadership level. Because if we are saying leaders should set the tone, how can they set the tone if they themselves still have, they still require some level of education and support? And I sense that is something that they would require on an ongoing basis,
Yes,
kind of
absolutely. And so
ongoing.
for an example, for us in the military, we have a regular schedule of mandatory training, and it is
Right.
mandated. So even some of it's 2 years, some of it's 5 years, some of it's, and that's to bring us up to speed and up to date with anything that is changing, particularly in employment law, in legislation. And, I mean, for instance, 10, 15 years ago, nobody spoke about menopause in the workplace.
True.
Women just had to get on with it. right? There was no reasonable workplace adjustments for us. Nobody spoke about it. Women of that particular age group and in that bracket would feel very alone, very couldn't talk about it, didn't feel supported by their employers, and felt like that they had to manage this on their own. But now I hear more men in the workplace talking about menopause
And that's
than
a good thing.
it's a really good thing. It's a really good thing because it means oh, I don't have to hide it anymore. I don't have to feel like it's an issue and it's a problem. We're talking about it. It's open, and then some of the younger men are probably not as interested in the subject, but as the men will get older, they'll have partners potentially who are coming into this area, and they'll ask you to say, what's it been like for you? And you're like, well, it's different for everybody, but go encourage your partner to go and seek some assistance from their GP and log on to this website. It's been really helpful. So even that kind of less formal education that we're having amongst ourselves, we're able to do that because we're being open, and and that's how we should be with the gender identity colleagues that we may have, people who are struggling with their gender identity, because the more open you are to talk about it, the more you learn and the more empathetic you can be and the more you can understand it, because when it's coming from a lived experience, it means more. If you're just having
Yes.
a PowerPoint presentation that you've got
Yeah.
to do once a year because HR said you've got to do it, people are less likely to get engaged.
So basically, we need to ensure that when it comes to, because in DEI there's always this debate about who's who can talk about certain things, you know, but I strongly believe that there needs to be a bit of a balance on some certain issue. Everybody, first and foremost, my baseline is we should all be, talking about inclusion. We should all be interested in it. Workplace inclusion is everybody's business. But
Absolutely.
also, I think that we need to make sure that it is somebody's responsibility.
It's
Because
everybody's
if you don't,
responsibility.
yeah, but I also think that we need to assign certain things to certain people,
Yeah,
because then otherwise, it doesn't really
yeah.
get done, does it?
No, I understand, and but that's why each company should have their own tone that's set by the leadership, their
Mm-hmm.
HR framework, whether
Mm-hmm.
that's an in-house or whether that's outsourced HR, that provide that framework and that set of rules and guidance that is ever changing. You know what it's like with employment law.
Yeah, it's every
You know,
every so often.
we've got a new government that's just come in that are changing all sorts of things for employment. So those policies and those procedures naturally have to change with the ebb and flow of legislation and also with cultural and social responsibility. So, but yeah, it is obviously it sits neatly within the HR environment because we're talking about people. But you absolutely have to have that buy-in and that support from the top, and also that leadership by example.
What about visibility at leadership level as well? Because I think that
Yeah,
that's also a big one, in terms of, leaders that identify in a gender diverse way should also, I mean, you can't really force people to do anything, and they don't have to really, they don't owe us a story. So they don't owe us, if they want to keep it as a personal journey, then good for them. That's their prerogative to do so. But I think that sometimes having visible leaders from different diverse backgrounds really helps.
yeah,
um
it does,
it's
but
part of the story of the organization, but
yeah,
also for employees who are more junior, it's also a way for them to have like role models within the organization.
yeah, no, I absolutely agree. But then you're going to always have that argument of, who is the best person for the job, and you cannot enforce diversity for diversity's sake.
No,
What we should do
that
is
should
make
be on a
sure,
t-shirt actually.
absolutely, right, because and actually why should we even be talking about diversity, right? We should just be talking about people because we're all people, and it doesn't matter, like I've said, the package that we come in. Yes, there are groups and areas and cultures that have very different experiences and histories to others, and we should know that, and we should be mindful of that. And
Historically marginalized, and we
absolutely,
should be talking about that.
absolutely, 100% we should, but we shouldn't let it define the individual or the organization.
I'm not sure I agree.
Oh, let's chat about that too.
Yeah, maybe not make right. So before I make this all about me, firstly, thank you to I'll come back to that point in a moment. Thanks
Mm.
to everybody who has joined us so far. I hope you're enjoying, the discussion and you're learning something. If you have any questions, please pop it in your questions in the chat and I'll just go back and check for every now and again. So if there's any question that's come to mind that you have for Becky or for myself, although I'm not really sure how much of your questions I can answer, you put them in the chat so that we can come back to them. So, but yeah, thanks for listening. So back to the point I was trying to make. Yes, we should talk about people. We are all people and all that. But historically, there are some groups of people that have experienced society and by extension the workplace in a very different way. And I use that in a negative perspective to other people. So these people are in the workplace, and part of how they've experienced society differently is that they haven't had access to some of what we call the benefits of society. They haven't had, they have been discriminated against, they have been victimized, and that has happened in the workplace and outside of the workplace. So
Yeah.
when we say, oh, we should just look at people as people, it's not that straightforward for them.
No,
And they may
I understand.
they would say, they would argue that actually no, this is the more reason why we need to be talking about diversity and inclusion, because the way I have experienced the workplace is different from how you have experienced the workplace and the opportunities that you have had, because sometimes there's an assumption, for example, that there's an assumption of competence for certain groups where there are other groups that have to be questioned as to whether or not they're actually good for certain things. So definitely that's at that point is where I think that you and I, our views may differ slightly.
No, I understand that too, and that's a term that we refer to as historical harm, and the effects that are still felt by
Still ongoing,
behaviors,
still
and
ongoing.
yeah. Oh no,
It's not
absolutely.
it's not that historical, it's historical and present.
No, I know, right? And so my experience will be different to yours, but when I joined the military at 16, I was paid less because I was a female for doing exactly the same job. And if not all of the jobs were available to me because I was female. And my career progression would have been worse because I was female. And if I had a baby, I would be thrown out of the military and I would have lost my
Even
pension.
now,
No, when I joined up. So,
okay.
but in my service experience, so it's my experience as well. People think I'm talking about the 1950s, but I'm not. This was up until 1993. I would be thrown out, so I would lose my pension, my career, and then if I was anything other than heterosexual, I would be sent to prison.
Hmm.
And then given a dishonorable discharge, lost my medals, lost my pension, lost my career progression. And that rule only changed for us in 2000. So when I say historical harm, I'm not talking about centuries ago. I'm not even talking about, the 1950s. This historical harm for us, the progression that I have seen in my employer, in my employment environment since 1989 to now is huge. It's apt and it's all for the better. It's all progressive and it's all moving forwards. And I love that. And I think we have to focus on the positive progression that we are making whilst being mindful of the historical harm and the harm that, as you quite rightly say, is still being done today, which shouldn't be being done today.
Absolutely.
I don't like to think, but I know that it does happen, that we are still living in this day and age in an environment where we don't have full inclusivity in the workplace. So whereas diversity is a very important term, it's huge for me. The most important term is inclusivity, because with inclusivity, true inclusivity, diversity will naturally follow.
But in some cases, without the diversity, there is no inclusivity. If we don't have a diverse group of people, say we've just basically recruited or promoted, say we've mainly recruited or promoted people from certain backgrounds, for example, there is no inclusivity because, you know, it would just basically be like for like
Yeah.
majority of the
No, I
time,
understand.
although nobody is 100% one thing or the other,
Yeah.
to put it that way. But if the majority are all from the same group with similar background, with similar access, most likely the inclusivity would not even be a big topic.
No, it wouldn't. No, no, I understand
Because
what you're saying.
yeah, that's why
But
I'm saying that
yeah.
that balance still needs to be there.
Oh, 100% it does. But I think if you're a truly inclusive employer, diversity would naturally follow.
It should, yes.
It should, because
we you and
there would
I
be
you and I can we can talk about stories for days. We know the reality
yeah.
of some of these
Oh, we
things
do.
that
Yeah.
happen. So we've
Yeah.
seen things, so we know.
Of course we do.
Yeah.
Yeah. But and we've also seen the adverse impact of oh, the term's just flown out of my head. Can't remember it. There's a term
Okay.
about when you purposefully employ somebody for the wrong reasons, just only to be
Diversity higher.
diverse. No, what's it called? No, not that. Positive discrimination. That's the
Right.
one.
Okay.
So, that's the other end, which,
Mm-hmm.
so we don't want to be going into that arena either. But I think if anything to take away from this session, it's, if you don't ask, you'll never know. So we shouldn't be afraid of asking people and colleagues if there's anything that we can do, or if, when we're hiring people, are there any reasonable workplace adjustments that you need? Is there anything that we can do for you? And this is everybody, every single employee. We should ask them what they need at work to make them be the best, most productive that they can be, and to have the most comfortable experience. And if that starts generating a conversation, because some people will have a bit of diversity attached to them that maybe others might not be aware of because it's not always visible, then we should have that conversation about it, because that will empower us all to just feel more comfortable and not feel that we're ever going to risk causing offense by just asking a simple question.
Right, that's fine. I think we might wrap up on that note. Is there anything else that you want employers to take from our conversation today in terms
Um,
of what employers and leaders, what they can do?
I think
Um,
definitely from the leadership perspective, they absolutely must have to be visible,
mhm,
and they need that full understanding that they set the tone. The senior leadership team set the tone and culture of the organization, and they need to be visible in that as well.
okay.
Because there's no point just sat behind your door of the CEO or the MD and not engaging with your people, because it's your people that make the company work.
Yeah, that's really good. And I guess another thing that we've talked about, so we've talked about policy, we've talked about education, we've talked about visibility, we've talked about making adjustments and asking, not waiting until we're asked what's until we're asked, just basically offering it upfront to say, is there anything that we can do to make you more comfortable here in this company, to any adjustments that we can make. And I think anybody can, any group can use that, really.
Yeah,
Not
absolutely.
any group can use that. But yeah, thanks very much. I don't see any questions in the chat. So I don't think we've got any questions through. But yeah, I just wanted to thank you for your time.
Well, thank you for inviting me. It was lovely to see you again.
And you, if there is any, or if anybody is watching this video on replay and then they have any questions,
Yes.
for Becky or for myself, I'm going to put our contact details in the captions so that you
Okay.
can you can put your questions in there, and then we can try and answer them as much as possible. So I just want to thank everybody who's joined us today. I appreciate your time. Apologies for the initial technical difficulty I still don't know what happened, but after this call, we would be going to look into that in a bit more detail and ensure that all our sessions run a little bit more smoothly. Yeah, I just want to say thanks to everybody. My name is Tutu Popola, and I am the MD of Sleek HR Limited. For this week and the following week, I will be talking about workplace inclusion with different experts. And this is our very first one. So if you're watching this on replay, please, there will be more videos which we would upload as well, so that people can see, and contact details of all our experts will be there, so you can reach out to them directly. So thanks everybody for your time, and have a lovely rest of the day.
Bye, everybody. Thanks for joining.
Bye bye.